History is often written by the victors, but there are some names that are carved not in ink, but in blood. For centuries, the world has known him as a creature of fiction, a vampire who stalks the night. But the truth hidden behind the legend is far more terrifying, far more tragic, and far more human than any ghost story. He was not a myth. He was a man of flesh and bone, forged in the fires of betrayal and hardened by the cruelty of his age. His name was Vlad Tips. To his enemies, he was the Impaler. To history, he is Dracula. Our story begins not in a crypt, but in the fortified medieval town of Sighisoara, deep in the heart of Transylvania. It was the winter of 1431. In a stone house that still stands today, a child was born into a world of chaos. His father, Vlad II, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a secret military society dedicated to protecting Christian Europe from the expanding Ottoman Empire. The symbol of this order was a dragon, or Dracul in the Romanian language. Thus, the father was known as Vlad Dracul. The son, following the ancient tradition, took the diminutive name Dracula, the son of the dragon, but in the local tongue, Dracul carried a double meaning. It meant dragon, yes, but it also meant the devil. Fate, it seems, has a dark sense of humor. Vlad's childhood was stolen from him. At the tender age of 11, he was not sent to a school of knights, but to a prison of princes. His father, desperate to keep his throne and appease the Ottoman Sultan Murad, who made a terrible choice. He sent his two sons, Vlad and his younger brother Radu, as hostages to the Turkish court. For 6 long years, young Dracula lived in the shadow of the sword at the fortress of Egrigaz in Asia Minor. It was here, in the heart of the enemy's empire, that the dragon's son learned his most valuable lessons. He did not break under the pressure of captivity. Instead, he observed. He watched the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite troops, and learned their discipline. He studied the Turkish methods of psychological warfare, the art of striking terror into the hearts of enemies before a battle even began. He learned that in the game of empires, mercy is a weakness, and fear is the only currency that buys respect. While his beautiful brother Radu grew soft and charmed by the Ottoman court, eventually becoming a favorite of the future Sultan Mehmed II, Vlad grew cold, he grew sharp, and he grew hateful. He swore a silent oath to the stone walls of his prison one day he would return, and he would make the world pay for every day of his stolen youth. When Dracula finally returned to Wallachia in 1448, the boy who had left was dead. In his place stood a man with eyes like winter ice. But home offered no comfort. He found that his father had been assassinated by his own nobles, the boyars of Wallachia, in a conspiracy with the Hungarians. Even worse was the fate of his elder brother, Mercy. The boyars had captured Mircea, blinded him with red-hot iron stakes, and buried him alive. The image of his brother gasping for breath in a dark grave haunted Dracula. It ignited a fury that would consume his soul. He realized then that he could trust no one. Not the Turks who held him captive, not the Hungarians who plotted against his family, and certainly not his own nobles who sold their princes for gold. If he was to rule, he would have to remake the land. He would have to cleanse it with fire and blood. His true reign began in 1456. It was a time when Halley's comet blazed across the sky, a celestial omen that terrified the nations of Europe. But Dracula looked up at the fiery star and saw it as a sign of his own rising power. He ascended the throne of Wallachia not as a puppet, but as an absolute master. His first act was one of calculated vengeance. He invited the boyars, the very nobles who had betrayed his father and brother, to a great Easter feast at his palace in Târgovist. They came dressed in their finest silks and velvets, expecting a celebration. They ate, they drank, and they laughed, thinking the new prince was just another fool they could manipulate. But as the sun set, Dracula's soldiers surrounded the hall. The music stopped. Dracula stood before them and asked a simple question: "How many princes have you survived?" The nobles boasted of living through 7, 10, even 20 reigns. It was an admission of their treachery. They changed princes as easily as they changed clothes. Dracula's judgment was swift. The older nobles were impaled on the spot, their bodies forming a grim ring around the palace walls. But for the younger, stronger ones, a worse fate awaited. He marched them 50 miles up the Arges River, whipping them like cattle. Their fine clothes turned to rags, their soft hands blood. At the top of a steep precipice, overlooking the river canyon, stood the ruins of an ancient fortress. Dracula ordered them to rebuild it. They worked until they dropped dead from exhaustion, their bodies mixed into the mortar of the walls. This fortress, Poenari Castle, became Dracula's eagle's nest, a symbol of his absolute power over the aristocracy. It stands there still, a silent witness to the price of treason. Dracula's justice was blind, and it was brutal. He believed that crime flourished because the laws were weak. So, he made the laws simple, and the punishment singular, the stake. Whether you were a thief stealing a loaf of bread, a wife cheating on her husband, or a high-ranking official taking a bribe, the penalty was the same: impalement. It was a slow, agonizing death. A wooden stake, greased and rounded at the tip to avoid piercing vital organs, was driven through the body. The victim was then hoisted upright, their own weight slowly dragging them down. Death could take hours, sometimes days. It was theater of the macabre, designed to terrify, and it worked. The German Saxon merchants of Transylvania, who had long exploited Wallachia's economy and supported Dracula's rivals, soon felt his wrath. In the cities of Sibiu and Brasov, Dracula unleashed a reign of terror. He burned their goods, destroyed their privileges, and impaled those who defied him. One famous woodcut from the period shows Dracula dining calmly at a table set up in the middle of a forest of stakes, dipping his bread into a bowl while surrounded by the groans of the dying. Yet to the common people of Wallachia, the peasants and the poor, he was often seen as a savior. For the first time in history, a peasant could leave a bag of gold in the middle of the town square, and no one would dare touch it, not out of morality, but out of mortal fear of the prince. He had created a society of absolute order, built on a foundation of absolute terror. But his greatest challenge was yet to come. The Ottoman Empire, the superpower of the age, was on the march. Sultan Mehmed Siku, the conqueror of Constantinople, the man who had brought down the Roman Empire, demanded tribute from Wallachia. He demanded gold, and worse, he demanded 500 young boys every year to be trained as janissaries. Dracula refused. When the Sultan sent envoys to demand submission, Dracula asked them to remove their turbans in his presence. The envoys refused, citing religious custom. "I will strengthen your custom," Dracula replied. He ordered his guards to nail their turbans to their skulls. It was an act of war, a declaration that the son of the dragon would bow to no man. In the spring of 1462, Sultan Mehmed I gathered an army that shook the earth. Historians say it was the largest force assembled since the invasion of Constantinople. Over 60,000 seasoned warriors, heavily armed with cannons and cavalry. Against this Leviathan, Dracula had barely 30,000 men, mostly peasants and light cavalry. Dracula knew he could not win a pitched battle, so he turned the land itself into a weapon. He employed a scorched earth policy that was ruthless in its efficiency. As the Turks advanced north across the Danube, they found nothing. No food, no water, no animals. Dracula had burned his own villages and poisoned the wells. He evacuated the population to the mountains, leaving the Turks to march through a wasteland of hunger and disease. He harassed them constantly. His light cavalry would strike from the forests like ghosts and vanish before the Turks could counterattack. He sent people infected with the plague and leprosy into the Turkish camps to spread sickness. The heat was unbearable, the water was toxic, and the morale of the invincible army began to crack. Then came the night of June 17, 1462, the night attack. Dracula, who spoke flawless Turkish from his years in captivity, disguised himself and infiltrated the Ottoman camp. He located the Sultan's golden tent. As darkness fell, he led a small elite force in a suicidal charge straight into the heart of the enemy army. With torches blazing and horns screaming in the night, the Wallachians tore through the Turkish lines. Their goal was simple: kill the Sultan. Panic erupted. In the confusion, the Turks fought each other. Dracula's men slashed their way toward the imperial tent, leaving a trail of chaos. Though they failed to kill Mehmed that night, the psychological blow was devastating. The conqueror of Constantinople had been humiliated in his own camp, but the true horror awaited the Sultan at the gates of Dracula's capital, Turgovist. As the Turkish army approached the city, expecting a final siege, they were met with a silence that was louder than the roar of cannons. There were no defenders on the walls. The gates were open. Before the city lay a field, but it was not a field of wheat, it was a forest of death. 20,000 Turkish prisoners, men, women, and children captured during the campaign, were impaled on high stakes. They covered an area of nearly 3 kilometers. The smell of decay was overpowering. The sight was so gruesome, so utterly alien to the rules of war, that even the Sultan, a man who had seen rivers of blood, was shaken to his core. How can we despoil of his land a man who does such things? Mehmed reportedly said, saluting Dracula's terrifying genius from afar. A man who does this to his own subjects and enemies is capable of anything. The Sultan turned his vast army around and marched home. Dracula had saved his country not with a great army, but with a nightmare. However, victory had a bitter taste. The resources of Wallachia were exhausted. The boyars, tired of the constant wars and the terror of the stake, turned against their prince. They found a willing puppet in Dracula's own brother, Radu the Handsome. Radu, backed by Turkish gold and soldiers, promised the nobles a return to the old ways. He promised peace. Dracula was forced to flee. He escaped to his mountain fortress at Poenari, but the net was closing. Legend tells that his wife, seeing the enemy approaching and knowing the fate that awaited a woman in captivity, threw herself from the battlements into the Arges River below, choosing death over dishonor. Dracula escaped through a secret passage into the mountains, seeking aid from his supposed ally, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. But in the world of politics, there are no friends, only interests. Matthias, rather than helping Dracula fight the Turks, arrested him. He forged letters claiming Dracula was a traitor who sought an alliance with the Sultan, a lie so bold it was absurd, but enough to justify imprisonment. For 12 long years, the dragon slept in a prison at Visegrad. But even in chains, the legend grew. Stories circulated that he captured mice and birds in his cell, impaling them on small splinters of wood, unable to suppress his nature. In 1476, politics shifted once again. The Turks were threatening Hungary, and King Matthias needed a general who knew how to fight them. He needed the Impaler. Dracula was released, unleashed once more upon the world. He regained his throne in Wallachia, but his time was short. 2 months later, in a murky battle near Bucharest, Vlad Dracula fell. Some say he was killed by the Turks. Some say he was assassinated by a disloyal boyar. Others claim that in the heat of battle, his own men mistook him for a Turk and struck him down. His head was cut off and sent to Constantinople, preserved in honey, to prove to the Sultan that the Kazaklube, the impaling prince, was finally dead. His body was reportedly buried at the island monastery of Snagov, but the mystery did not end with his death. When archaeologists opened his tomb at Snagov centuries later, they found it empty. Only animal bones remained. Where the true remains of Vlad the Impaler rest, no one knows. Vlad III died in 1476, but Dracula was just being born. The German pamphlets detailing his atrocities spread across Europe like wildfire, thanks to the newly invented printing press. He became the villain of the medieval world. Centuries later, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker stumbled upon this name in the British Museum. He combined the history of the ruthless prince with the dark folklore of Transylvania, the Strigoi, the Moroi, the undead who feast on blood. And so, the warrior prince became the vampire count. Today, if you travel to the ruins of Poenari Castle, climb the 1,000 steps, and stand on the precipice looking down at the dark river, you can feel it. The wind whispers through the Carpathian peaks. It is not the story of a monster in a cape. It is the echo of a man who fought empires, who defied sultans, and who showed the world that sometimes, to fight monsters, one must become a monster. Dracula is dead. Long live Dracula.